Good morning. Thank you for having me. I must say I am fascinated by the conversation and very, very impressed by the different interventions we've had. I'm going to use the topic of my brief talk, and I apologize if there's no presentation. I was taken a little bit short, and I racked my brain last night until 2 in the morning about what I would be speaking about, because there is an inherent contradiction between the title of the presentation you have imposed upon me, Christopher, the value of predictive risk management, and the current situation, which is, if we are to believe, our panel, that this is an unpredictable event, and therefore the notion that if it's unpredictable and it is so catastrophic as it is now, then clearly there cannot be prediction, and we must toss that particular word out. So you've put me in an impossible situation, Christopher, from an epistemic standpoint. Let me just therefore try to not repeat and revisit what have been excellently said by my colleagues, but start with some observation and then weave a conversation about enterprise risk management, what it is not, what it has been, what has not served us very well, and what we might want to do. And I will leave the notion of the big data and all of that to the back end of that conversation. Um, so, the what we're facing, and I've heard it, is, I've heard the word unpredictable, accidental, extraordinary, unique. Um, but I think we are failing to consider this massive historical incident within the context within which it has taken place, which is really globalization. And and globalization not as something that started 20, 30 years ago, but globalization as a phenomenon of the unification of the different cultures and civilization and parts of the world into a unified system. And I fear there we made some fundamental mistakes. We assumed that globalization was going to make us safer and more resilient. Um, but in fact, what we've observed for the past 20 years or so, since effectively 9/11, is that with globalization, um, and global uncertainty, global risks, and what I called GCR, global and country risk, have increased. Um, and and so I very much place costs, the coronavirus, as part of that particular trend. And it is not unlike, in a way, the onset of the plague in Europe in the 15th century, because the plague was very much brought about by, the explosion of globalization that took place when Europe started opening itself to global trade and the opening of the of the spice routes and all of that. I mean, it came through Venice, from what is now Turkey, and it completely destroyed um, the assumptions of the world, but it also opened up a number of, well, a new future. So let me speak a little bit about globalization, because I think we need to really change our understanding of what it is and what it's not, and what's going to happen to us in this form of globalization. But let's start with, I mean, really basic system theory. Is that the more parts in your system are connected, the more interactions there are between those parts, and the more complexity and uncertainty you're introducing. And so what you have is, in effect, is this infamous, in this particular case, a perfect incident of the butterfly effect. When one incident in one market of one city in one country 3 months ago, 3.5 months ago, result in this extraordinary cascade of domino effects and of catastrophic proportion at the international level, and it immediately turns our lives inside out, upside down, destroys and destroys our assumptions and our experience of the world. Um, so for me, it really is. I mean, that's kind of what hit me last night, thinking about what I was going to be talking about. Is this really is, Lawrence Conrad Lawrence's perfect butterfly effect. So what we've done is we've built a very complex system, very integrated system um, that has now experienced an enormous traumatic stress. But it adds itself to a series of traumatic stresses that we have been experiencing. I mean, massive amount of environmental destruction, largely the product of our human activities, largely the product of our globalization. And so, I mean, one can apply a kind of Marxist perspective on this and say, well, it's action creates reactions, and reactions creates counter reactions. So, thesis, antithesis, synthesis. So, we had for 50, 60 years the thesis of globalization and trade and the freedom of movement of people, and that was a good thing, and it led to this extraordinary increase in human well-being. But with it, the antithesis element of it, which is environmental destructions, displacement of work, massive changes in global power politics, the rise of China, etc. And then this kind of crisis that leads us to rethink the whole system. But the question is it going to lead to deglobalization, or is it going to lead to reglobalization? I don't think we can walk back the process of globalization. Um, so the, the question then, therefore, of predictability, and specifically of costs. Cost is not a black swan. And it's important for me to state that because, you know, if we take the definition of the black swan by Taleb, then it means that it's an event that is only, what is a black swan event that can only be anticipated in hindsight, right? And the consequences are obvious. In this particular case, we've had a series of global institutions and global actors who have been planning and anticipating for the increase in this kind of incidents. Unfortunately, I don't think that it's a it's not a failure of prediction we have. It's not a failure of anticipation. What we have is a failure of governance. Um, our global governance system has failed us. And all these institutions that were supposed to play the role of detection, alerting, response, coordination have failed. And why have they failed? Well, precisely because we are at a time now where we have this increase in the geopolitics of competition between great powers. And China played a very dangerous political game for internal reasons and external reasons in how it mismanaged the communication of this, because it didn't want it to come out because it's seen as a failure of their own system. In doing so, they didn't protect the rest of the world, and the international governance system failed to play a role into that. And so it kind of, well, it went viral, and it went viral because we failed to manage it. And and now what you have this extraordinary fast change where 2 months ago China was looking very bad in terms of perception and management, and now suddenly, because the US is failing in containing and managing it, we are now seeing a reversal of the roles. But what is to say what's going to happen in a month's time or 2 months' time? We don't know if there's going to be um, a reversal to COVID in China. We don't know if there's not going to be other viruses until such time as China takes radical measures to control those live animal and wild animal markets, which is where most of these things originate. So I think it's really too early to say what's going to happen specifically. But in the broad sense, I think it's very important to recognize that things like that mostly highlight our own governance vulnerabilities and failures. and what's going to come out of that. So to go back to the notion of Taleb, that most changes are catastrophic in nature and therefore they cannot be predicted, and the focus of risk management shouldn't be on anticipating and forecasting, but it should be on building resilience. I'll come back to that in a bit. But what I want to say is that, in a way, risk management, if we accept the notion, the notion that Taleb, that we are really mostly at the mercy of unpredictable events. It really then makes our traditional assumptions about risk management implausible. Um, and because we focus on past events, we keep on focusing on past events. And this is a big event. And so I tend to agree, and I've said that in previous event, Chris, is I tend to agree that, if all we do is manage events and risk management, we have failed. Because really we can say that COVID is already the past, right? Um, and we are going to turn all our focus and attention on this, which is the right thing to do, right? It's like if the Germans invade your country, like my country 70 years ago, well, you have to respond. You can't say, well, this too shall pass. Let's focus on the next event. You got to fight that fight, and you got to win it to be able to deal with the future. But at the same time, we need to be able to understand the limitations of that fight and the possibility that in a very complex world with all these different issues still happening, we could be hit by something else tomorrow. And so we really need to think about resilience, the purpose, the systems and resilience of our mental models, our theoretical models. Let me just go back to that, and then I'll put a word about the economic impact and government response in South Africa, where I'm doing some work on right now. But really, so for me, I've had a problem with ERM for 20 years, and I think ERM has, ERM is flawed theoretically. Because it's mostly based on two elements. It's mostly based on what we call, empiricism, historicism, really, which is, let's try to understand what happened in the past and let's extrapolate, what may happen in the future. And one of the speakers said, none of us had this in our models. So, but again, if we had the right data, we could see that. There's something there. But yes, we would have said catastrophic impact, low likelihood, let's not worry about, because there's nothing we can do. I want to question that. And I think we need to start going back to pretty fundamental issues of the nature of knowledge and institutions. And I think we need to rediscover something that has been greatly lost. Sorry, my dogs are going crazy. Something that has been greatly lost in the world of big data, and the great danger of big data.
Just check your time.
Yeah, I'm almost done. We need to go back to what we call the Popperian approach. Karl Popper, hypothetical deductive approaches, where some of the greatest discoveries are based on speculations and therefore scenario planning, right? So we need to go back to finding the balance between data and hypothetical scenarios, and scenario planning. And then we need to really use the power of computing towards simulations and simulated response. And where every incident is added to the database of events, and we start developing playbooks. And I always think about, what they do in aviation and, pilots is you build a catalog of incidents, and out of that you start developing response scenarios, expecting that every incident will be different. But you are accressing that knowledge, and therefore that calls for a revolution in ERM, in my mind. My concluding words will be about what was said on the economics impact and the role of government and businesses. Look, we can't say this is an abnormal situation and this is an abnormal crisis, and we must therefore do whatever it takes, including locking down our economy, and at the same time apply the business as usual view on the role of government and, for instance, government GDP to debt ratio, or indeed healthcare systems. If this is indeed unprecedented, then we need unprecedented measures. And I am concerned by the timidity. So I'm impressed by the speed and effectiveness so far of the South African government response when it comes to the health aspect of COVID. I am far less impressed by the economic position taken, particularly in a fragile state like ours with massive amount of inequalities. Uh, in the capacity to respond to COVID by individuals who live in very different material conditions, and in the impact that it will have. And I think we really need to discard for now considerations of debt to GDP ratio, role of government, role of business. And we need to look at a massive stimulus to the economy. Otherwise, we will drown. And I have spoken to some business organization, and I said, we need a stimulus to the tune of, 3, 4, 5 trillion rand. And when I said that, people gasped. They said, we thought 200, 300 billion would be enough. That's a week of GDP, 300 billion. Thank you.